Some places accumulate disappearances the way others accumulate rainfall. Year after year, decade after decade, people vanish from the same stretches of wilderness. Different victims, different circumstances, different search operations, but the same outcome: missing persons who are never found, or who are found in locations that make no sense. Researchers who study wilderness disappearances have noticed these concentrations. They call them clusters, geographic areas where the rate of unexplained vanishings exceeds what chance alone would predict. Places where the terrain, the conditions, or something else entirely seems to swallow people more frequently than surrounding areas. This is not mysticism. This is pattern recognition. When dozens of people disappear from the same valley over several decades, when bodies are found miles from where search is concentrated, when experienced outdoors people vanish from trails they have walked many times before, the accumulation of cases demands attention. The National Park Service does not officially recognize clustering. Each disappearance is investigated individually. Each case file stands alone. But when you map the disappearances, when you overlay decades of missing persons reports onto the geography of American wilderness, certain locations emerge again and again. Yosemite, Great Smoky Mountains, Mount Rainier, Shasta Trinity, the Superstition Mountains of Arizona. These names appear in case file after case file. These landscapes have claimed hikers, climbers, photographers, and casual visitors across generations. The individual cases vary. The location remains constant. This video examines 5 of these clusters, 5 geographic zones where disappearances have concentrated over decades. We present the documented cases, the search efforts, the theories investigators have developed. We also note the folklore that has grown around these places, the stories locals tell, the explanations that exist outside official reports, not because we endorse those explanations, but because they are part of the documented cultural response to these disappearances. What creates a cluster? Why do certain valleys, certain mountain slopes, certain trail systems seem to claim more victims than others? Is it terrain? Weather patterns? Something about human behavior in specific environments? Or is it statistical noise, random variation that our pattern-seeking minds transform into meaningful concentration? The cases themselves offer no definitive answers, but they offer evidence, they offer patterns, and they offer questions that official investigations have never fully resolved. If you find value in documentation of cases that challenge easy explanation, subscribe to this channel. We examine the evidence, we present the theories, we let you draw your own conclusions. Our first cluster is perhaps the most famous. A valley in the Sierra Nevada that has been called the Bermuda Triangle of American National Parks. A place where the concentration of disappearances has generated both serious research and persistent folklore. A landscape of granite and waterfalls that has claimed visitors for over a century. Yosemite National Park receives approximately 4 million visitors annually. The vast majority return home safely with photographs and memories, but a small percentage do not return at all. And within that small percentage, a disproportionate number vanish from a specific region, the area around Tenaya Lake and the high country north of Yosemite Valley. The concentration was first noted in the 1980s when a ranger reviewing historical records observed that missing persons reports clustered in certain drainages. The pattern has continued since. Hikers, climbers, solo travelers, and groups have all contributed to the count. The cases span age ranges, experience levels, and circumstances. What they share is geography. Locals have explanations. The Ahwanichi people who lived in the valley for centuries before European contact have oral traditions about certain areas. One canyon was traditionally avoided, associated with a wind spirit that the early ethnographers recorded as Pohono. Whether this represents ancient knowledge of genuine hazards or cultural interpretation of natural dangers, the avoidance was documented before disappearances became a subject of modern study. Current residents and park employees have their own observations. Certain areas generate more rescue calls. Certain trails produce more injuries. Certain zones seem to disorient visitors more frequently than the terrain alone would explain. These observations are anecdotal. They do not appear in official reports, but they circulate among the people who work in the park year after year. Our first case from this cluster involves a photographer who came to document the landscape and became part of its mystery. Instead, Nathan Howell was 34 years old when he arrived at Yosemite in September of 2011. He was a professional landscape photographer based in Portland, Oregon, with extensive experience shooting wilderness areas throughout the Pacific Northwest. His work had appeared in regional magazines and outdoor publications. He understood backcountry travel, having spent weeks at a time in remote locations waiting for optimal light conditions. He had visited Yosemite 3 times previously. He knew the park well enough to navigate without constantly consulting maps. He had favorite locations for sunrise and sunset shots. He knew which trails connected to which viewpoints and how long each approach required. On this trip, he planned to spend 4 days photographing the high country around Tenaya Lake. September offers advantages for landscape photography in the Sierra: fewer crowds, stable weather, and the beginning of color change in the vegetation. He had reserved a backcountry permit and filed his itinerary with the Wilderness Office as required. His plan was to hike from the Tenaya Lake trailhead to the May Lake area on the first day, then work his way through the Cathedral Range over the following days, photographing granite formations at various times of day. He carried professional camera equipment worth several $1,000s, along with standard backpacking gear for a 4-night trip. He checked in at the Wilderness Office on September 14th. Rangers noted that he seemed relaxed and well prepared. His pack was appropriate for the duration and conditions. He had maps, adequate food and water, and layers for the cool nights at elevation. Nothing about his demeanor suggested concern. He left the trailhead at approximately 8:30 in the morning. The weather was clear, with temperatures expected to reach the mid-60s during the day and drop into the 30s overnight. Trail conditions were reported as good. Other hikers were using the same route, and several reported seeing a man matching his description during the first few hours of the day. The last confirmed sighting was at approximately 1:15 in the afternoon. A group of 3 hikers from Sacramento encountered him near the junction where the trail splits toward May Lake and the 10 Lakes area. They spoke briefly. He mentioned he was looking for a specific granite formation he had seen in photographs and was trying to locate. They pointed him toward a route that climbed above the main trail. He thanked them and continued on. He never reached May Lake. He never checked in at any of the locations on his filed itinerary. When he failed to return on September 18th as scheduled, his emergency contact, a colleague in Portland, notified the Park Service. The search began on September 19th. Rangers familiar with the area deployed along his planned route. They checked May Lake and the surrounding terrain. They checked the 10 Lakes basin. They checked locations known to photographers as productive shooting sites. They found nothing. No tent, no pack, no camera equipment, no sign that he had camped anywhere in the area. Search dogs were brought in on September 20th. Handlers started the dogs at the trail junction, where he had last been seen, and attempted to track his route. The dogs indicated interest in a direction that led off the main trail, climbing toward a granite ridge that separates 2 drainage systems. The handlers followed the indication approximately 1 mile before the dogs lost the trail in a boulder field. This boulder field would become significant in the investigation. It sits at approximately 10,200 feet elevation above the tree line, exposed to wind and weather. The granite slabs create a maze of passages and gaps. A person could move through this terrain in multiple directions without leaving visible tracks on the rock. The dogs could not establish which direction he had traveled from the boulder field. His scent simply ended among the rocks, as if he had stopped walking and disappeared. Helicopter searches began on September 21st. Crews flew patterns over the high country, looking for bright colors against the gray and tan landscape. His tent was red. His pack was blue. His camera bag was black with yellow trim. Any of these should have been visible from the air in the sparse vegetation above tree line. The helicopters found nothing. Multiple passes over the boulder field and surrounding terrain produced no sighting of equipment or a person. Ground teams expanded the search over the following days. Over 40 personnel covered terrain extending several miles in all directions from the last confirmed sighting. They checked cliff bases for signs of a fall. They checked water sources where a person might have gone for hydration. They checked every route a hiker might reasonably have taken from the boulder field. They found no trace of Nathan Howell, not his pack, not his tent, not his camera equipment, not a single item that could be confirmed as belonging to him. The search continued for 12 days before transitioning to limited operations. Over the following months, rangers conducting routine patrols in the area kept alert for any discovery. Hikers were asked to report unusual findings. Nothing emerged. His family hired a private search team the following summer. This team spent 2 weeks covering terrain that the official search might have missed. They found nothing. 2 years after his disappearance, a hiker in a different section of the park, approximately 8 miles from the boulder field where the dogs lost his trail, reported finding a camera lens cap. The cap was collected and examined. It matched the brand he was known to use, but lens caps are common items, and the connection could not be confirmed. His camera equipment has never been recovered. His pack has never been found. His body has never been located. He remains officially listed as missing within Yosemite National Park. The investigation considered several theories. The first theory was a fall while photographing. Landscape photographers often work near cliff edges and exposed positions to capture dramatic angles. Perhaps he climbed to an unstable location, lost his footing, and fell into terrain where his body could not be seen from above or reached from below. This theory is plausible given his profession. The high country contains numerous cliffs and drop-offs. A fall into certain formations could conceivably conceal a body from aerial observation, but it does not fully explain the evidence. His scent trail ended in the boulder field, not at a cliff edge. The dogs did not indicate interest in any direction that would have led to a precipice, and professional photographers who work wilderness areas are typically careful about positioning precisely because they understand the risks. The second theory was medical emergency. Perhaps he suffered a stroke, heart attack, or other sudden condition that incapacitated him. He was 34, but cardiac events can occur at any age. If he collapsed in the boulder field, his body should have been found. The search covered that area intensively. A person who died among the rocks would have been visible to searchers working through the terrain on foot, unless he did not collapse immediately. Unless he walked some distance in an impaired state before succumbing. This would explain why the scent trail ended in the boulder field, but the body was not found there. But it does not explain where he went, or why months of subsequent searching produced nothing. The third theory was that he left the area deliberately. Perhaps he chose to disappear. Perhaps he walked out of the park and assumed a new identity. This theory was investigated through examination of his financial records, personal relationships, and professional situation. His account showed no unusual activity. His relationships appeared stable. His photography career was developing well. There was no apparent motive for voluntary disappearance, and there was the matter of his equipment. Several $1,000s worth of cameras and lenses vanished with him. A person staging a disappearance might leave belongings behind. They would be unlikely to carry heavy professional equipment on an escape. The fourth theory involved the geography itself. The high country around Tenaya Lake contains terrain features that can disorient even experienced hikers. Granite looks similar across large areas. Landmarks that seem distinctive from one angle become unrecognizable from another. People have become lost in this terrain before. Perhaps he wandered further than intended, became confused about his location, and died in an area that searches did not reach. The wilderness is vast. Search operations, however extensive, cover only a fraction of the available terrain. This theory is consistent with the general pattern of wilderness disappearances, but it struggles to explain the complete absence of any evidence. Equipment doesn't decompose. Brightly colored gear should be visible for years. Something should have been found. The fifth theory is that an animal was involved. Black bears are common in Yosemite. Mountain lions are present throughout the Sierra. An attack, while rare, could potentially explain both the disappearance of the person and the subsequent movement or scattering of equipment. But animal attacks typically leave evidence: blood, torn fabric, drag marks. The boulder field showed no such signs, and attacks by either bears or mountain lions on adult males are extremely uncommon. The case remains unsolved. The boulder field where Dogs lost his trail has been searched multiple times in the years since his disappearance. Hikers pass through the area regularly. No one has found any trace of the photographer who vanished there in September of 2011. Rangers who work the Tenaya Lake area are familiar with his case. Some have walked the boulder field themselves, trying to understand what happened. The terrain offers no answers. The granite sits as it has for millennia, revealing nothing about the people who have vanished among its formations. The cluster continues to accumulate cases. Before and after his disappearance, others have vanished from the same general area. The pattern persists. The explanations remain incomplete. Over 2,000 miles to the east, across the continent in the Appalachian Range, a different cluster has been accumulating cases for even longer. The Great Smoky Mountains, straddling the border between Tennessee and North Carolina, hold records of disappearances dating back to the 19th century. The concentration of cases in this region has generated its own body of research, its own folklore, and its own unanswered questions. The Smokies present different challenges than the Sierra Nevada. Where Yosemite's high country is exposed granite above tree line, the Smokies are densely vegetated at all elevations. Rhododendron thickets grow so dense that visibility drops to a few feet. Fog can roll in within minutes, reducing orientation to guesswork. The terrain is steep and folded, with countless hollows and ridges that look similar to each other. More people disappear in Great Smoky Mountains National Park than in any other unit of the National Park Service. This is partly explained by visitation. The Smokies receive over 12 million visitors annually, more than twice Yosemite's count. But the rate of disappearances per visitor also appears elevated, and the characteristics of the cases often match patterns seen in other clusters. Local communities have lived alongside these disappearances for generations. Cherokee oral traditions describe certain areas as dangerous, associated with spirits or beings that should be avoided. European settlers who arrived in the 18th century developed their own stories. Tales of creatures in the hollows, lights in the forest at night, sounds that could not be attributed to known animals. Whether these stories represent genuine cultural transmission of environmental knowledge or simply reflect the human tendency to explain misfortune through narrative, they are part of the documented response to this landscape. Rangers report that local residents often have opinions about which areas are safe and which should be avoided. These opinions do not appear in official literature, but they circulate in communities that have buried their share of hikers who never came home. Our second case comes from this cluster, a disappearance that became one of the most intensive searches in the park's history, and that remains unsolved more than a decade later. Margaret Chen was 51 years old when she entered the Great Smoky Mountains on October 3, 2013. She was a high school biology teacher from Knoxville, Tennessee, approximately 40 miles from the park boundary. She had been hiking in the Smokies for over 20 years and considered the park a second home. Her familiarity with the terrain was extensive. She had walked every major trail in the park at least once. She had completed the Appalachian Trail section that crosses through the Smokies. She led student field trips into the backcountry and served as a volunteer trail maintainer during summer months. If anyone could be considered an expert on navigating this wilderness, she qualified. On October 3rd, she planned a day hike to a waterfall in a remote section of the park. The route required approximately 6 miles of trail walking, followed by 2 miles of off-trail travel through dense forest. This was not an official destination. It was a location she had discovered years earlier and returned to periodically. She called it her secret place. She told her husband she would be back by dinner time. She left her home at 7 in the morning and drove to a trailhead on the Tennessee side of the park. Her car was later found in the parking area with her spare clothing and a cooler of food in the back seat, indicating she expected to return. She signed the trail register at 8:12 in the morning. Her entry noted her destination as the waterfall, using a personal abbreviation that investigators later interpreted with help from her husband. No one else signed the register that morning. She would be hiking alone. The trail she followed was well maintained for the first 4 miles. After that, it narrowed to a path that was less frequently used. The final 2 miles to her destination required leaving even this path and navigating through old-growth forest with no marked route. She had made this hike at least a dozen times. She knew where to cross the creek, where to climb the ridge, where to descend into the hollow where the waterfall dropped into a pool. She did not need a map for this route. It was stored in her memory from years of repetition. When she had not returned by 8 in the evening, her husband became concerned. By 10, he was alarmed. He called the Park Service and reported her missing. Rangers responded immediately. Given her experience level and the specific destination, they knew approximately where to look. Teams deployed to the trailhead at first light on October 4th and began hiking toward the waterfall. They reached her destination by mid-morning. The waterfall was there, dropping 30 feet into a clear pool. The surrounding forest was dense and quiet. Margaret Chen was not there. Her pack was not there. There was no sign she had arrived. The search expanded through October 4th and into the following days. Teams worked backward along the route she would have taken, checking for any indication of where she might have left the expected path. Dogs were brought in to track her scent from the trailhead. The dogs followed her trail along the maintained path for approximately 4 miles. At a point where the trail crossed a creek, the dogs lost the scent. They indicated interest in multiple directions, but could not establish a clear continuation. Either she had entered the water and walked downstream, or something had interrupted the tracking at this location. Teams searched both banks of the creek for several miles in each direction. They waded the creek itself, checking pools and undercuts where a body might lodge. They found nothing. Helicopters flew patterns over the forest, but the dense canopy made aerial observation largely useless. Unlike the exposed granite of Yosemite, the Smokies reveal little from above. The trees form a continuous cover that conceals everything beneath. The search continued for 3 weeks at high intensity. Over 200 personnel participated at the peak, including park rangers, county search and rescue, state resources, and volunteers. They covered over 50 square miles of terrain. They checked every hollow and ridge within a reasonable radius of her intended route. They found nothing. No pack, no clothing, no sign of injury or struggle. Margaret Chen had walked into the forest she knew better than almost anyone and had vanished completely. The investigation examined several theories. The first theory was that she reached the waterfall, suffered an accident, and fell into the pool. The waterfall pool is deep in places, with underwater recesses that are difficult to examine. Perhaps she slipped on wet rock, hit her head, and drowned. Perhaps her body became lodged in an underwater crevice. Dive teams searched the pool multiple times. They found no body. They found no equipment. The pool was not large enough to conceal an adult indefinitely. If she had drowned there, evidence should have been found. The second theory was that she deviated from her intended route. Perhaps she saw something that drew her attention, a plant specimen, or an unusual animal. Perhaps she decided to explore a different hollow. Perhaps she got turned around in the dense vegetation and walked in the wrong direction. This theory could explain why she was not found at her destination. But it does not explain the dogs losing her scent at the creek crossing, 4 miles from the waterfall. If she had simply taken a wrong turn deeper in the forest, the dogs should have tracked her at least that far. The third theory was a medical emergency. Perhaps she suffered a stroke, heart attack, or diabetic episode while hiking. She was 51 and in apparent good health. But sudden medical events can occur without warning. If she collapsed somewhere on the trail, her body should have been found. The route she intended to follow was searched repeatedly. Every logical location for a medical emergency was checked. Nothing was found. The fourth theory was an animal encounter. Black bears are abundant in the Smokies. Wild boars, Descendants of escaped domestic pigs are also present and can be aggressive. Perhaps she encountered an animal that attacked her and dragged her body into the brush. Bear attacks in the Smokies are documented, but rare. Fatal attacks are extremely uncommon, and attacks typically leave evidence: blood, torn clothing, disturbed vegetation. The creek crossing where dogs lost her scent showed no signs of violence. The fifth theory was human involvement. Perhaps she encountered someone on the trail who harmed her. The park is large and monitoring is limited. Criminal acts, while rare, have occurred. This theory was investigated through interviews with everyone known to have been in the park that day. No suspicious individuals were identified. No witnesses reported seeing anyone other than typical hikers. Her personal life revealed no conflicts or threats that might suggest targeted violence. The sixth theory involves the creek itself. The dogs lost her scent at a water crossing. Perhaps she entered the creek and walked a considerable distance in the water before exiting. This would break the scent trail and could lead her far from the expected route. But why would she do this? She knew the area. She had no reason to wade downstream when her destination lay in a different direction. Unless she was fleeing something, unless she was confused, unless something happened at that creek crossing that changed her behavior. The case has generated significant attention in the years since her disappearance. Her husband has organized multiple private searches. Friends and former students have walked the forest looking for any trace of her. Internet communities dedicated to missing persons have analyzed maps, weather records, and terrain features. None of this effort has produced answers. Margaret Chen walked into a forest she had walked dozens of times before and never returned. The creek where dogs lost her scent flows on. The waterfall she intended to visit still drops into its pool, seen now only by the few hikers who know where to find it. Her case is one of many from the Smokies cluster. Before and after her disappearance, others have vanished from this same landscape. Some were found eventually, in locations far from where they were expected. Some have never been found at all. The pattern continues. Local residents who have lived near the park for generations have their own perspectives on these disappearances. Some speak of areas they will not enter, family traditions passed down about certain hollows or ridges. Some mention sounds heard in the forest, shapes seen at dusk, experiences they hesitate to describe to outsiders. These accounts are anecdotal. They do not appear in official reports. They cannot be verified or measured, but they represent a cultural response to a statistical anomaly. When people disappear from a landscape at elevated rates for generations, the communities who live alongside that landscape develop explanations. Whether those explanations reflect genuine knowledge or simply human pattern seeking, they are part of the documented history of this cluster. The official record contains only the cases, the searches, the theories that led nowhere, the files that remain open. It contains the names of people who walked into the Great Smoky Mountains and never walked out. It contains questions that have never been answered. Margaret Chen is one of those names. A biology teacher who knew the forest, a hiker who had walked the same route a dozen times, a woman who told her husband she would be back by dinner and was never seen again. The Smokies continue to receive their 12 million visitors annually. The vast majority return home safely, but the cluster continues to grow. New cases are added to the files. New searches find nothing. New families begin the long wait for answers that may never come. 2 clusters examined. 2 landscapes that have accumulated disappearances over decades. 2 sets of cases that share patterns while differing in specifics. In our next section, we travel to the Pacific Northwest, to a volcano that has claimed more victims than any other mountain in the Cascade Range. Mount Rainier, a peak that draws climbers from around the world and returns some of them only as names on a memorial. If you are finding value in this examination of wilderness clusters, consider subscribing to this channel. We document the patterns that official reports often miss. We present the evidence without sensationalism. We ask the questions that remain unanswered. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you hiked in any of these cluster areas? Have you experienced anything unusual? The documentation of these patterns depends on people sharing their observations. The investigation continues. The clusters continue to accumulate cases, and the wilderness continues to keep its secrets. Mount Rainier dominates the skyline of western Washington. On clear days, the volcano is visible from Seattle, from Tacoma, from communities across the Puget Sound lowlands. It rises over 14,000 feet, a mass of glacial ice and volcanic rock that draws climbers from around the world. It is also one of the deadliest mountains in North America. The statistics are stark. Since record-keeping began, over 400 people have died on Mount Rainier or in its immediate vicinity. Many of these deaths have clear explanations: falls during technical climbs, avalanches, exposure in sudden storms. But a subset of cases fits a different pattern: people who vanish without explanation. Bodies never recovered despite extensive searches. Equipment found in locations that make no sense given the planned routes. This is our third cluster, a mountain that locals have watched claim lives for generations, a landscape of beauty and danger where the line between a successful summit and permanent disappearance can be measured in minutes or feet. The geological reality of Rainier contributes to its hazards. The mountain is heavily glaciated, with over 35 square miles of permanent ice. Crevasses open and close as glaciers move. Snow bridges that support weight in morning can collapse by afternoon. Whiteout conditions can descend within minutes, reducing visibility to zero and eliminating all navigational reference points. But the cluster pattern at Rainier extends beyond the glaciated zones where such hazards are expected. People have vanished from lower elevation trails, from established camps, from areas that should pose no unusual danger. The concentration of unexplained cases has generated attention from researchers who study wilderness disappearances, and from local communities who have observed the pattern across generations. Indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest have traditions concerning Rainier that predate European contact. The mountain was called Tahoma or Tacoma in several regional languages, and certain areas were associated with spiritual significance that discouraged casual approach. Whether these traditions reflect accumulated knowledge of genuine hazards or represent cultural interpretation of a dramatic landscape, they are part of the documented history of human relationship with this mountain. Current residents of communities surrounding the park have their own observations. Rangers who have worked Rainier for decades speak carefully about certain zones where searches have repeatedly failed. Climbers who have summited multiple times describe experiences they hesitate to attribute to natural causes. Search and rescue personnel note patterns in their operations that do not match their experience on other peaks. These accounts do not constitute evidence of anything beyond the mountain's objective dangers, but they represent a consistent cultural response to a landscape that has claimed more than its statistical share of victims. Our first case from this cluster involves a climber who reached the summit and began descending, watched by others on the mountain, and then ceased to exist as far as any search could determine. Daniel Whitfield was 41 years old when he summited Mount Rainier on July 19, 2014. He was an experienced mountaineer from Boulder, Colorado, with successful ascents of peaks throughout the western United States and South America. He had climbed Rainier twice before, reaching the summit both times via different routes. This was not unfamiliar terrain for him. He was climbing with a commercial guiding company, part of a group of 8 clients and 3 guides. The group had departed Camp Muir at 1 in the morning, following the standard Disappointment Cleaver route. Weather conditions were favorable: clear skies, light winds, temperatures cold but manageable. The climb proceeded without incident. The group reached the summit at approximately 7:30 in the morning. They spent roughly 40 minutes on top, taking photographs and recovering from the final push. Daniel appeared strong throughout the climb, keeping pace with the guides and showing no signs of altitude sickness or exhaustion. The descent began at approximately 8:15. The group moved in a standard formation, roped together in teams of 4. Daniel was on the second rope team, positioned between 2 other clients with a guide at the rear. The descent route followed the same path as the ascent, a well-established track marked by wands placed by earlier climbing parties. At approximately 9:45, the group stopped to rest at a relatively flat area known as the football field, a broad snow slope below the summit crater. The teams unroped briefly to eat, drink, and adjust equipment. This is standard practice at this location, where crevasse danger is minimal and the terrain allows safe movement without rope protection. Daniel was observed eating a snack and drinking water. He spoke with other climbers about the successful summit. His demeanor was relaxed and positive. Nothing about his behavior suggested distress or impairment. At approximately 10:15, the guides called for the group to rope up and continue the descent. Climbers began organizing into their rope teams. When the guide for the second team conducted a head count, Daniel was not present. The guide assumed he had joined a different rope team or stepped away briefly. He called his name. There was no response. Other climbers looked around. Daniel was not visible anywhere on the football field. The area is exposed and relatively featureless. A person in climbing gear, wearing the bright red jacket that Daniel had worn throughout the climb, should have been visible from anywhere on the slope. The weather remained clear. Visibility was unlimited. There was nowhere obvious for a person to go. The guides conducted an immediate search of the football field and surrounding terrain. They checked the route leading back toward the summit in case he had decided to return for some reason. They checked the route leading down towards the cleaver. They called his name repeatedly. He was not found. He had been present 15 minutes earlier. He was not present now. No one had seen him leave. The group descended to Camp Muir and reported the situation to rangers. A search operation was initiated that afternoon. Helicopters flew patterns over the upper mountain. Ground teams covered the football field and adjacent terrain. The search continued for 5 days at high intensity. No trace of Daniel Whitfield was found. Not his pack, which he had been carrying when last seen. Not his ice axe, which had been in his hand. Not his bright red jacket. Not a single item that could be confirmed as belonging to him. The search expanded to include crevasse probing in areas below the football field. If he had somehow walked off the established route and fallen into a crevasse, evidence might be found. Teams probed systematically across the glacier below the rest area. Nothing was found. No crevasses in the immediate area showed signs of recent entry. No equipment was visible in any of the openings that were examined. The investigation examined several theories. The first theory was a fall into a hidden crevasse. Despite the relatively safe terrain at the football field, crevasses can exist in unexpected locations. Perhaps he stepped onto a snow bridge that collapsed, dropping him into a void that closed above him. This theory was taken seriously by searchers. Extensive probing was conducted. No crevasse entry point was identified. The area where he had been standing was examined in detail. The snowpack was stable with no evidence of collapse. The second theory was voluntary departure. Perhaps he decided to leave the group and descend independently. Perhaps he took a different route for personal reasons. But why would he do this? He was with a guided group he had paid to join. His car was at the trailhead where the group would return. His belongings were at the hotel where the group was staying. He had no apparent reason to separate from the party, and other climbers on the mountain would have seen him. The Disappointment Cleaver route is the most popular on Rainier. Dozens of people were ascending and descending that day. A solo climber in a bright red jacket moving independently of groups would have been noticed. No one reported seeing him after the football field rest stop. The third theory was sudden medical emergency. Perhaps he suffered a cardiac event, stroke, or altitude-related crisis that incapacitated him rapidly. Perhaps he collapsed somewhere out of sight of the other climbers. But the football field offers limited places to collapse out of sight. The terrain is open. Other climbers were distributed across the area. A person collapsing would likely have been observed or would have been found during the immediate search. The fourth theory was disorientation and wandering. Perhaps he became confused, possibly due to mild altitude sickness that had not been apparent earlier. Perhaps he walked away from the group without clear awareness of what he was doing. This theory could explain his departure, but not his complete disappearance. A disoriented person walking across open snow would have left tracks. The weather was clear. His footprints should have been visible. Searchers found no tracks leading away from the group's rest area in any direction other than the established route. The fifth theory involves the glacier itself. Rainier's glaciers are dynamic, constantly moving and changing. Perhaps some unusual glacial feature, a moulin or a concealed void, existed at that location and has since closed or shifted. This theory is speculative, but not impossible. Glaciers contain features that can open and close. A person falling into such a feature might be transported by meltwater or ice movement to a location far from the entry point. But no such feature was identified at the football field. The area has been crossed by thousands of climbers before and since. No unusual hazards have been documented at that location. Daniel Whitfield remains officially listed as missing on Mount Rainier. His body has never been recovered. His equipment has never been found. The last confirmed observation of him, eating a snack and talking with fellow climbers, occurred in the presence of multiple witnesses. 15 minutes later, he had vanished from open terrain in clear weather. His family has returned to Rainier multiple times. They have hired private search teams. They have consulted with glaciologists about the possibility of recovery. They have found nothing. The mountain has kept him. Our second case from this cluster involves a disappearance from lower elevation, from terrain that should have posed no unusual hazard, in circumstances that parallel patterns observed at other cluster sites. Sandra Okafor was 56 years old when she arrived at Mount Rainier National Park on August 3, 2018. She was a retired nurse from Spokane, Washington, who had taken up hiking after her career ended. She had completed dozens of trails throughout the Pacific Northwest and was working toward visiting every national park in the region. She came to Rainier to hike the Skyline Trail, a popular loop that begins at Paradise and climbs through subalpine meadows with views of the mountain and surrounding peaks. The trail is well maintained, clearly marked, and hiked by thousands of visitors annually. It is not considered technical or particularly dangerous by national park standards. She arrived at the Paradise parking lot at approximately 8 in the morning. She signed in at the trailhead register, noting her planned route as the Skyline Loop with an expected return by mid-afternoon. The weather was clear, with temperatures expected to reach the mid-60s at the trailhead elevation. She was hiking alone, which was her preference. She had told friends that she found solo hiking meditative, a way to process thoughts and enjoy nature without the distraction of conversation. She was experienced enough to navigate established trails independently and carried appropriate equipment for a day hike. Multiple witnesses observed her on the trail during the morning hours. A family from California spoke with her at Myrtle Falls Overlook at approximately 9:15. A couple from Portland passed her near Panorama Point at approximately 10:30. A solo hiker from Seattle encountered her on the Golden Gate Trail section at approximately 11:45. All described her as friendly, unhurried, and apparently enjoying the hike. The Seattle hiker was the last person to see her. Their conversation was brief, just a few words about the weather and the views. She mentioned she planned to complete the full Skyline Loop, rather than taking one of the shorter alternatives. She was moving at a comfortable pace and showed no signs of distress. She did not return to the parking lot. When the lot closed at dusk and rangers conducted their standard end-of-day check, her car remained. The trailhead register showed her sign-in, but no sign-out. The search began the following morning. Rangers hiked the Skyline Loop in both directions, checking all major stopping points and the connector trails that branch off the main route. They did not find her. The search expanded over the following days. Teams covered not just the Skyline Trail, but all trails in the Paradise area. Helicopters flew patterns over the meadows and slopes. Dogs were brought in to track her scent from the trailhead. The dogs followed her trail along the established route, confirming the direction of travel reported by witnesses. At a point on the Golden Gate Trail, approximately 1 mile past where the Seattle hiker had encountered her, the dogs lost the scent. The location was a stretch of trail that crosses a rocky slope with limited vegetation. The trail is clear and marked with cairns. There are no junctions or alternative routes at this specific point. The trail continues around a shoulder of the mountain with maintained tread and adequate markers. The dogs indicated that her scent simply ended on the trail, not at a junction, not at a viewpoint where she might have stopped, not at any logical location for a person to leave the established route. The trail continued forward. Her scent did not. Searchers covered the terrain in all directions from this point. They checked above the trail, where steep slopes lead toward glaciated terrain. They checked below the trail, where the mountainside drops through forest to valleys far below. They found no trace of her. The search continued for 11 days. Over 100 personnel participated, covering terrain extending miles in all directions from where the dogs lost her trail. Helicopter thermal imaging was used during night operations to detect a body that might be concealed in vegetation. Sandra Okafor was not found. Not her pack, not her hiking poles, not any item that could be confirmed as belonging to her. The investigation examined several theories. The first theory was a fall from the trail. The Golden Gate section crosses terrain where a misstep could send a hiker tumbling down steep slopes. Perhaps she slipped, fell, and came to rest in vegetation or a ravine that concealed her from searchers. This theory prompted detailed examination of the slopes below the trail. Teams rappelled into drainages. Helicopters flew low over the forest canopy. If she had fallen, some evidence should have been visible. Disturbed vegetation, a flash of color from clothing or equipment. Nothing was found. The slopes showed no sign of recent disturbance. The forest below revealed nothing. The second theory was a medical emergency. Perhaps she suffered a stroke, heart attack, or other sudden condition that caused her to collapse. Perhaps she left the trail in a confused state before succumbing. But why would the dogs lose her scent on the trail rather than following it to where she collapsed? If she walked off the trail before dying, her scent should have continued in that direction. The abrupt end of the scent trail on the established path does not match a medical emergency that caused gradual incapacitation. The third theory was an animal encounter. Black bears are present in the Paradise area, though attacks are rare. Mountain goats can be aggressive during certain seasons. Perhaps an animal encounter caused her to flee the trail, with subsequent events concealing her fate. Animal encounters typically leave evidence, scat, tracks, disturbed ground. The area around where the dogs lost her scent showed no signs of animal activity, and attacks rarely result in complete concealment of the victim. The fourth theory was voluntary disappearance. Perhaps she chose to leave her life behind. Perhaps the solo hike provided an opportunity to vanish. Investigation of her background revealed no apparent motive. Her finances were in order. Her relationships appeared stable. She had plans for future trips and had recently purchased new hiking equipment. Nothing suggested she intended to disappear. The fifth theory involves the terrain characteristics at the specific location where her trail ended. The rocky slope where dogs lost her scent is exposed to wind. Perhaps unusual air currents disrupted scent tracking, and she actually continued past that point, but the dogs could not follow. Handlers considered this possibility, but found it inconsistent with their experience. Dogs lose scent gradually in windy conditions. They do not lose it abruptly at a specific point. The pattern suggested she had stopped at that location, not that tracking conditions deteriorated. Sandra Okafor remains missing. Her car was eventually towed from the Paradise lot. Her belongings were returned to family members. The trail where she was last tracked continues to carry thousands of hikers each summer, most of them unaware that a woman vanished from that exact stretch of maintained path. Her case has been featured in regional news coverage and discussed in online communities dedicated to missing persons. Theories have ranged from the conventional to the speculative. None have produced her or explained what happened at that point on the Golden Gate Trail. Mount Rainier continues to accumulate cases. The mountain that dominates the Seattle skyline, that draws visitors from around the world, that appears on postcards and calendars as a symbol of Pacific Northwest beauty, has a documented history of claiming people under circumstances that investigations cannot fully explain. Rangers who have worked the park for years speak of Rainier with respect that borders on wariness. They know the objective hazards: crevasses, avalanches, weather. They also know the cases that do not fit those categories, the disappearances that remain unexplained despite extensive investigation. The cluster continues. New cases will be added to the files. New searches will be conducted in terrain that has defeated previous searches. New families will begin the long wait for answers that may never come. 150 miles to the south, another volcanic peak rises from the Cascade Range. Mount Shasta is smaller than Rainier, less glaciated, less technically challenging. But it has generated its own cluster of disappearances, its own body of folklore, and its own unanswered questions. Shasta occupies a unique position in the cultural geography of the American West. The mountain has attracted spiritual seekers, mystics, and unconventional believers for over a century. Legends of underground civilizations, interdimensional portals, and mysterious lights have accumulated around the peak, generating a tourism industry based on the unusual alongside the conventional outdoor recreation. This cultural overlay complicates analysis of disappearances. When someone vanishes from a mountain already associated with paranormal claims, the temptation to attribute the disappearance to extraordinary causes is strong. Separating the documented cases from the mythology requires careful attention to what is actually known versus what has been embroidered by folklore. The documented disappearances from the Shasta area share patterns with other clusters. Experienced outdoors people vanishing from established routes, dogs losing trails at specific points, bodies or equipment found in unexpected locations. Complete disappearances despite intensive searches. Local residents have observed these patterns for generations. Some attribute them to the mountain's supposed mystical properties. Others note that Shasta's terrain, while less dramatic than Rainier's, contains hazards that can surprise even experienced visitors. The volcanic landscape includes lava tubes, unstable slopes, and weather patterns that can change rapidly. Our first case from this cluster involves a disappearance that occurred in plain sight, in a popular area, during conditions that should have posed no unusual hazard. Trevor Blackwood was 37 years old when he arrived at Mount Shasta on June 14, 2016. He was a software engineer from San Francisco who had become interested in the mountain's unusual reputation after reading about it online. His trip combined conventional hiking with what he described to friends as spiritual exploration, an attempt to experience whatever qualities made Shasta different from other peaks. He had moderate hiking experience. He had completed several trails in the Bay Area and had backpacked in Yosemite twice. He was not an expert mountaineer, but the routes he planned on Shasta did not require technical skills. He intended to hike established trails and possibly attempt the standard summit route, which is considered non-technical during summer months. He established a base camp at the Bunny Flat trailhead on June 14th. The area is popular with both day hikers and climbers beginning summit attempts. On the evening of his arrival, he spoke with several other campers about his plans and his interest in the mountain's reputation. On June 15th, he set out to hike toward Horse Camp, a historic stone cabin approximately 2 miles up the mountain that serves as a waypoint for summit climbers. The trail is well established and clearly marked. Hundreds of people hike this route on busy summer days. He left Bunny Flat at approximately 7 in the morning. A fellow camper saw him walking up the trail and waved. Trevor waved back and continued on. Horse camp records show that he arrived at approximately 8:45. The camp is staffed by volunteers during summer months, and the caretaker on duty noted his arrival in the log. Trevor signed the guest book, rested briefly, and spoke with the caretaker about his plans. He mentioned he wanted to continue higher on the mountain to get a better view, though he did not intend to attempt the summit that day. He left Horse Camp at approximately 9:30, heading up the standard climbing route toward Lake Helen, a seasonal snowmelt lake at approximately 10,400 feet elevation. The route is marked with poles and is traveled by dozens of climbers daily during summer. He did not return to Horse Camp. He did not return to Bunny Flat. When he failed to appear at his campsite that evening, Other campers noted his absence, but assumed he had decided to camp higher on the mountain. On June 16th, when he still had not returned, a fellow camper contacted rangers. The search began that afternoon. Teams hiked to Horse Camp and confirmed he had been there. They continued up the climbing route toward Lake Helen. At approximately 9,800 feet, they found his pack sitting beside the trail. The pack was upright, leaning against a rock as if placed there deliberately. Inside were his water bottles, food, extra clothing, and a camera. His trekking poles were lying on the ground beside the pack. His climbing helmet was clipped to an external loop. Trevor himself was not there. He was not visible anywhere on the slope above or below the pack location. Searchers fanned out from the pack's location. They climbed toward Lake Helen and beyond. They descended through the rocks and snow below the trail. They checked every visible route a person might have taken from that point. They found nothing. No footprints leading away from the pack in snow that should have recorded movement. No sign of a fall or struggle. No indication of what had caused him to leave his equipment and disappear. The search continued for 8 days. Helicopters flew patterns over the upper mountain. Dogs were brought to the pack location, but could not establish a direction of travel from that point. Ground teams covered terrain extending miles in all directions. Trevor Blackwood was not found. His pack remains in evidence storage. His camera contained photographs of the hike from Bunny Flat to Horse Camp and the initial portion of the climb above. The last photograph was time-stamped at 10:23 on June 15th, approximately 45 minutes before the pack was estimated to have been left at its discovery location based on the timeline of his departure from Horse Camp. The photograph shows the view looking up toward the summit. Nothing unusual is visible. The camera was functioning normally. Whatever happened occurred after this photograph was taken. The investigation examined several theories. The first theory was altitude sickness. At nearly 10,000 feet, altitude can affect people who are not acclimatized. Perhaps Trevor experienced severe symptoms that caused him to become disoriented. Perhaps he left his pack to lighten his load and then wandered away in a confused state. This theory could explain leaving the pack, but not the complete absence of evidence. A confused person walking on snow leaves footprints. Searchers found no tracks leading away from the pack location in any direction. The snow around the pack showed only the compressed area where it sat, as if no one had walked away. The second theory was a fall into a volcanic feature. Mount Shasta contains lava tubes, some of which have hidden entrances. Perhaps Trevor stepped on thin crust over a concealed tube and fell into a void. This theory prompted examination of the terrain around the pack location. No lava tube entrances were found. The geology of that specific area does not suggest subsurface voids, and lava tube collapses typically leave visible evidence at the surface. The third theory was animal involvement. Mountain lions are present in the Shasta area. Perhaps a predator attacked him, dragging him away from his equipment. But lion attacks on adult males are extremely rare, and dragging typically leaves evidence: blood, drag marks, disturbed snow. None was observed around the pack location. The fourth theory was voluntary disappearance. Given his interest in the mountain's mystical reputation, perhaps he decided to vanish deliberately, seeking some kind of spiritual transformation. Perhaps he walked away from his life with intention. This theory was considered carefully. His family and friends found it inconsistent with his character. His finances, relationships, and career showed no signs of someone planning to disappear. His car remained at the trailhead, with belongings inside that would have been valuable if he intended to start a new life. The fifth theory involves environmental conditions that searchers did not recognize. Perhaps unusual weather, rockfall, or other natural events occurred that are not reflected in the documented conditions. Perhaps something happened that was not recorded or observed. This theory is difficult to evaluate. Weather records show clear conditions. No seismic activity was recorded. Other climbers on the mountain that day reported nothing unusual. Trevor Blackwood remains missing. His interest in the mountain's unusual reputation has led to speculation in online communities about what might have happened to him. Some suggest he found whatever he was looking for. Others note that the documented facts of his case match patterns seen at cluster sites with no supernatural associations. The pattern suggests something more mundane than portal theories. It suggests a mountain that claims people under circumstances that investigations cannot explain, regardless of what beliefs those people held when they arrived. Our second case from this cluster involves a disappearance under very different circumstances, demonstrating that the Shasta pattern affects experienced outdoors people as readily as spiritual seekers. Helen Marchetti was 62 years old when she entered the Mount Shasta wilderness on September 21, 2019. She was a retired Forest Service employee from Redding, California, who had worked in wilderness management for 31 years. She had spent her career learning to navigate, assess hazards, and operate safely in backcountry environments. After retirement, she continued to hike and backpack regularly. She had completed long trails throughout California and had intimate knowledge of the forests and mountains where she had worked. If anyone could be considered an expert on the terrain around Mount Shasta, she qualified. She planned a 3-day solo backpacking trip through the wilderness area on the mountain's southern flank. Her route would take her through old-growth forest, across several creeks, and to a high camp with views of the peak. She had hiked this general area many times during her career and knew the terrain well. She filed a detailed trip plan with a friend in Redding, specifying her intended route, campsite locations, and expected return date. She carried a satellite messenger device capable of sending GPS coordinates and pre-programmed messages. She had done everything a responsible solo backpacker should do. She entered the wilderness from a trailhead near McLeod on the morning of September 21st. The weather was typical for early fall. Warm days, cool nights, minimal chance of precipitation. Trail conditions were reported as good. On the evening of September 21st, she sent a check-in message via her satellite device. The message confirmed she had reached her first planned campsite, and all was well. The GPS coordinates matched her filed itinerary. On the evening of September 22nd, she sent another check-in message. She had reached her second campsite, the high camp with views of the mountain. Again, coordinates matched her plan. Her message mentioned beautiful sunset light on the peak. She was expected to send a third message on September 23rd, confirming she had begun her hike out. That message never came. Her friend waited until the afternoon of September 24th before contacting authorities. Perhaps the device had malfunctioned. Perhaps she had decided to extend her trip. But by evening, when she had not returned to her car at the trailhead, concern became certainty that something was wrong. The search began on September 25th. Teams hiked to her second campsite, using the GPS coordinates from her final message. They found the camp. Her tent was set up properly, staked and guyed against wind. Inside were her sleeping bag, sleeping pad, and personal items. Her food bag was hanging from a tree branch, properly stored against bears. Her stove and cooking equipment were organized near a flat rock she had used as a kitchen. Helen was not there. Her satellite messenger was not there. Her day pack, which she would have used for shorter hikes from the base camp, was not there. The indication was that she had left camp on the morning of September 23rd for a day hike, intending to return. Her backpack remained with the tent. Only her smaller day pack was missing, along with the satellite messenger she typically carried in its pocket. Searchers fanned out from the camp, following trails and game paths in all directions. They checked viewpoints she might have visited. They checked water sources where she might have stopped. They called her name into the forest. They found no trace of her. Dogs were brought to the camp on September 26th. The handlers attempted to establish which direction she had traveled when she left that morning. The dogs indicated multiple directions from the camp but could not establish a consistent trail in any of them. The handlers interpreted this as meaning she had walked in several directions at different times during her stay, which was consistent with day hiking from a base camp. But they could not determine which direction represented her final departure or where she had gone. The search continued for 2 weeks. Over 60 personnel covered terrain extending miles in all directions from her camp. Helicopters flew patterns over the forest and the slopes above. Her satellite messenger should have been transmitting if she had activated an emergency alert. No signal was received. Helen Marchetti was not found. Her camp was eventually recovered by searchers. Tent, sleeping bag, food, stove. All the equipment of a backpacker who intended to return. She never returned. Her daypack, satellite messenger, and whatever she was wearing have never been located. A 31-year veteran of Forest Service wilderness work vanished from terrain she knew well, leaving behind a camp that waited for an occupant who would not come back. The investigation examined several theories. The first theory was a fall during a day hike. The terrain around her camp includes some steep areas where a fall could be serious. Perhaps she slipped, was injured, and could not activate her messenger before succumbing. This theory is plausible, but faces challenges. A fall serious enough to prevent messenger activation would likely be a fall visible to aerial search. Her daypack and gear should have been findable, even if her body was concealed. Nothing was found. The second theory was a medical emergency. Perhaps she suffered a stroke, heart attack, or other sudden condition while away from camp. She was 62 and apparently healthy, but sudden medical events occur. If she collapsed somewhere in the forest, her body should have been found. Dogs should have been able to track her scent to the location. The inability to establish any trail from the camp suggests something more complicated than walking out, collapsing, and remaining in place. The third theory was animal attack. Black bears are common in the area. Mountain lions are present. Perhaps a predator encountered her during her day hike. Bear attacks rarely result in complete disappearance. Lions occasionally cache prey, but evidence of an attack, blood, torn equipment, drag marks, typically remains. Nothing was found around her camp or anywhere searchers looked. The fourth theory was human violence. Perhaps she encountered someone in the backcountry who harmed her. The wilderness is large, and monitoring is minimal. This theory was investigated, but no evidence supported it. No suspicious individuals were identified in the area. Her relationships and finances showed no signs of anyone who might wish her harm. The fifth theory is that she is in the wilderness, somewhere searchers did not look, in terrain that concealed her from detection. The forest is vast. Coverage, however extensive, cannot examine every square foot. This is the default explanation for disappearances that yield no evidence. It may be correct, but it does not explain why dogs could not track her from the camp, or why 2 weeks of intensive searching found nothing in an area she knew well and would have navigated rationally. Helen Marchetti remains missing. Her family has organized additional searches in subsequent years. Her former colleagues at the Forest Service have walked the area where she disappeared, using their professional knowledge to check locations that standard searches might miss. Nothing has been found. The camp where she spent her last known night has been visited by other backpackers in the years since, some aware of its history, and some not. The mountain continues to rise above the forest, indifferent to the questions that remain. 2 more clusters examined. 2 more landscapes that have accumulated disappearances across decades. Mount Rainier, with its glaciers and sudden storms. Mount Shasta with its volcanic terrain and cultural mythology. Different mountains, different characteristics but similar patterns in the cases that have never been solved. The accumulation of evidence across these cluster zones raises questions that individual case investigations cannot answer. Why do certain locations produce elevated rates of unexplained disappearances? Why do search dogs consistently lose trails at specific points? Why are bodies and equipment found separated by distances that suggest post-mortem movement? Why do experienced outdoors people vanish from terrain they know well? In our final section, we examine our 5th cluster, and then consider what the patterns across all 5 zones might tell us about the nature of these disappearances. The Superstition Mountains of Arizona present yet another variation on themes we have seen repeated. And the accumulated evidence across all 5 clusters offers patterns that deserve attention from anyone who ventures into wilderness areas. If you are finding value in this investigation, consider subscribing to this channel. We document cases that official reports often treat in isolation. We identify patterns that emerge only when disappearances are examined across time and geography. We ask questions that remain unanswered. The investigation continues. The clusters continue to accumulate cases, and the wilderness continues to keep its secrets. The Superstition Mountains rise from the Sonoran Desert, approximately 40 miles east of Phoenix, Arizona. From a distance, they appear as a jagged wall of volcanic rock, darker than the surrounding terrain, with spires and canyons that have inspired legends for centuries. Up close, the mountains reveal a landscape of hidden ravines, sheer cliffs, and terrain that can kill the unprepared within hours. This is our fifth and final cluster, a place where disappearances have been documented since the 1800s. A landscape that combines extreme environmental hazards with a mythology so dense that separating fact from folklore has become nearly impossible. The Superstition Wilderness covers over 160,000 acres of federally protected land. Unlike the national parks examined earlier, this is Bureau of Land Management territory, with less infrastructure, fewer rangers, and larger areas that see no human visitation for months at a time. The terrain is unforgiving. Summer temperatures exceed 115 degrees. Water sources are scarce and unreliable. The volcanic rock creates maze-like formations where navigation becomes guesswork. People have been vanishing here since record-keeping began. Prospectors searching for gold, hikers seeking solitude, treasure hunters following maps of dubious authenticity, photographers drawn by the dramatic landscape. The pattern spans generations, and the accumulation of cases has created what locals call the most dangerous wilderness in Arizona. The folklore surrounding these mountains is extensive. Apache oral traditions describe the area as a dwelling place for thunder gods, a zone where humans should not linger. Spanish explorers in the 16th century recorded warnings from indigenous guides about entering certain canyons. The legend of the Lost Dutchman mine, supposedly a rich gold deposit whose location died with a German immigrant in 1891, has drawn thousands of searchers into terrain that has killed dozens of them. Current residents of Apache Junction and Gold Canyon, the communities nearest the wilderness boundary, have opinions about the mountains that do not appear in any official literature. Some families have lost members to the superstitions across multiple generations. They speak of areas where compasses behave erratically, where the rock formations seem to shift appearance depending on light conditions, where sounds carry in ways that make distance and direction impossible to judge. These accounts are anecdotal. They represent community folklore rather than documented phenomena, but they are part of the cultural context surrounding a cluster that has accumulated disappearances for over a century. Our first case from this cluster involves a man who entered the superstitions searching for something specific and found something else entirely. Raymond Castellanos was 63 years old when he drove to the First Water Trailhead on March 7, 2015. He was a retired civil engineer from Tucson who had developed an interest in the Lost Dutchman legend after reading a book about it during his recovery from hip replacement surgery. What began as a casual interest had grown into an obsession that consumed his retirement years. He had accumulated maps, historical documents, and personal theories about the mine's location. He had made over 40 trips into the Superstition Wilderness over a 3-year period, each time exploring different canyons and formations. His wife described his searching as a hobby that kept him active and mentally engaged. His adult children viewed it with more concern, worried about a man in his 60s hiking alone in dangerous terrain. Raymond was not naive about the risks. He had grown up in the Arizona desert and understood heat, dehydration, and the importance of preparation. He carried adequate water, told family members his intended route, and typically returned before the hottest part of the day. His previous 40 trips had been completed without incident. On March 7th, he planned to explore a canyon he had identified from aerial photographs as potentially matching descriptions in historical accounts. The canyon was located approximately 4 miles from the trailhead, requiring moderate hiking through rocky terrain. He expected to be back at his vehicle by early afternoon. He signed in at the trail register at 6:45 in the morning. His entry noted his destination using a personal reference system that investigators later decoded with help from his maps. He was carrying 2 liters of water, food for the day, and basic navigation equipment. The weather forecast called for clear skies with temperatures reaching the mid-80s, mild by superstition standards. A group of hikers from California encountered him at approximately 8:30, about 2 miles from the trailhead. They exchanged brief greetings. He mentioned he was looking for a specific rock formation and seemed confident about his route. They continued toward their own destination and did not see him again. When Raymond had not returned by 6 in the evening, his wife called the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. Given the terrain and his age, deputies responded immediately. A search was organized for first light the following morning. Search teams reached the canyon he had intended to explore by mid-morning on March 8th. They found no sign of him. The canyon was deep and narrow, with walls that blocked sunlight for much of the day. Loose rock and unstable slopes made movement difficult. But there was no pack, no water bottles, no indication that Raymond had ever arrived. The search expanded over the following days. Helicopters flew patterns over the surrounding terrain. Ground teams covered adjacent canyons and the ridges connecting them. Tracking dogs were brought in to follow his scent from the last confirmed sighting. The dogs tracked him approximately 1 mile beyond where the California hikers had encountered him. At a junction where multiple game trails intersected, the dogs indicated confusion. His scent appeared to lead in 2 different directions simultaneously, then faded entirely. The handlers had never encountered this pattern before and could not explain it. The search continued for 9 days. Over 70 personnel covered terrain extending several miles in all directions from the point where dogs lost his trail. They found no trace of Raymond Castellanos. On the 10th day, a volunteer searcher working a grid in a canyon 3 miles north of the target destination made a discovery. Sitting upright against a boulder, as if placed there deliberately, was his backpack. Inside were his water bottles, still half full, his food, untouched, his maps and notes, his car keys. Raymond himself was not there. His body was not in the vicinity. Searchers covered every foot of the surrounding area and found nothing. The backpack's location made no sense. It was 3 miles north of where he had intended to go, in a canyon he had never mentioned to family or noted in his maps. The route from the last confirmed sighting to the backpack location would have required climbing a significant ridge and descending into terrain he had no apparent reason to enter. And he had left his water behind. In the Sonoran Desert, where dehydration can kill within hours, no experienced hiker would voluntarily abandon their water supply. The bottles were half full. He had not consumed all his water and discarded empty containers. He had left drinkable water sitting in his pack. The search shifted to the area around the backpack discovery. If he had left his pack there, he should be somewhere nearby, perhaps injured, perhaps deceased, perhaps waiting to be found. He was not there. Teams searched for an additional week, focusing on the canyon where the pack was found and all connecting terrain. Cadaver dogs were brought in to search for remains. Nothing was found. Raymond Castellanos has never been located. His pack sits in evidence storage, its contents exactly as they were when discovered. His half-full water bottles remain a detail that investigators have never been able to explain. The investigation developed several theories. The first theory was heat-related cognitive impairment. Even in March, desert temperatures can cause confusion and irrational behavior. Perhaps he became overheated, made poor decisions about direction, and ended up in the wrong canyon. Perhaps he removed his pack in a confused state and wandered away. This theory could explain the distance from his intended route and the abandoned water. Heat exhaustion causes people to act irrationally. They sometimes remove clothing and equipment that they need for survival. But the temperature on March 7th reached only the mid-80s, well below the extreme heat that typically causes severe impairment. And he was found to have consumed only half his water, suggesting he was not yet critically dehydrated when he abandoned his pack. The second theory was a fall with subsequent movement. Perhaps he fell and injured himself, then tried to walk out and collapsed somewhere that searchers could not locate. Perhaps he left his pack behind because he could not carry it while injured. This theory struggles with the distance and terrain. A person injured badly enough to abandon essential supplies would be unlikely to travel far. The area around the pack was searched intensively. No body was found. The third theory was animal involvement. Mountain lions are present in the superstitions. Javelinas, a species of wild pig, can be aggressive. Perhaps an animal encounter caused him to flee, dropping his pack, and he was subsequently attacked in a location where evidence was scattered or concealed. Mountain lion attacks on adult males are extremely rare. Javelinas are not typically predatory toward humans, and attacks usually leave evidence that searchers would find. Blood, torn clothing, drag marks. None of this was present. The fourth theory was voluntary disappearance. Perhaps he staged the scene. Perhaps he wanted to vanish and used his treasure hunting trips as cover for planning an escape. His wife and children found this theory implausible. His finances were normal. His relationships were stable. He had grandchildren he adored, and a retirement he appeared to enjoy. There was no apparent motive for disappearing. The fifth theory involves the terrain itself. The Superstition Mountains contain mine shafts, caves, and fissures that are not mapped. Perhaps he fell into an opening that searchers did not locate. Perhaps he is underground, in a space that surface searches could not detect. This theory cannot be ruled out. The volcanic geology of the superstitions creates voids and cavities that could conceal a body indefinitely. Ground-penetrating radar was used in some areas, but could not cover the entire search zone. The case remains unsolved. Raymond Castellanos entered the superstition wilderness looking for a legendary gold mine, and became another name on the list of people who have vanished in these mountains. His backpack with its inexplicable half-full water bottles remains the only physical evidence of what happened after he left the main trail. His family has returned to the mountains multiple times, walking the canyons where he searched for treasure, hoping to find some trace of the man who disappeared. They have found nothing. The superstitions reveal nothing they do not choose to reveal. Our second case from this cluster involves a disappearance witnessed in real time by multiple people. A case where the victim was not alone, where others were watching, and where the vanishing happened nonetheless. The Peralta Trail is one of the most popular routes into the superstition wilderness. It climbs approximately 1,300 feet, over 2.5 miles to Fremont Saddle, offering views of Weaver's Needle, a distinctive rock formation central to Lost Dutchman mythology. On weekends, dozens of hikers use this trail. It is not remote or isolated. On November 12, 2017, a group of 4 friends from Tempe began hiking the Peralta Trail at approximately 7 in the morning. They were all in their late 20s, experienced hikers who had completed the route several times before. The group consisted of 2 men and 2 women, all employed in the Phoenix technology sector, all physically fit. They reached Fremont Saddle at approximately 9:15. They took photographs, ate snacks, and enjoyed the view of Weaver's Needle rising from the canyon below. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, temperatures in the low 60s, excellent visibility. At approximately 9:45, one member of the group, a 28-year-old software developer named Kevin Marsh, announced he wanted to climb a short distance up a rock formation adjacent to the saddle for a better photograph. The formation was approximately 50 feet from where the others were sitting, clearly visible, and did not appear to present unusual difficulty. His 3 companions watched him walk toward the formation. He was wearing a bright orange jacket. He carried only his phone for photographs. He reached the base of the rock and began climbing a natural ramp that led to a higher ledge. He moved out of direct sight as he rounded a corner of the formation. His friends could no longer see him, but expected him to appear on the ledge above within seconds. The climb was short. He was in good shape. There was no reason to expect delay. He did not appear on the ledge. After approximately 2 minutes, one of his friends called his name. There was no response. After another minute, a second friend walked toward the formation to check on him. She rounded the corner where he had disappeared from view and found nothing. The ramp continued upward. The ledge was empty. Kevin was not there. She called his name again. No response. She climbed to the ledge herself and looked in all directions. The terrain was rocky, but open. There was no vegetation where someone could hide. There were no overhangs or crevices large enough to conceal a person. Kevin Marsh was gone. The three remaining friends searched the immediate area for approximately 30 minutes before concluding that something was seriously wrong. They called 911 at 10:22. Search and rescue personnel arrived at Fremont Saddle by early afternoon. The search that followed was intensive, but brief. The area was limited. The terrain was visible. If Kevin had fallen, he should have been findable. If he had walked away, he should have been visible to his friends or to the other hikers on the trail. He was not found. Not on the saddle. Not on the formation he had been climbing. Not on the trail in either direction. Not in the canyon below, which was searched by rappelling teams. His phone was discovered on the third day of searching. It was found wedged in a crack in the rock formation, approximately 20 feet up the ramp he had been climbing. The phone was damaged, but functional. His photographs showed the views from Fremont Saddle. The last photograph was time-stamped at 9:43, 2 minutes before he left his friends to climb the formation. There were no photographs from the climb itself. Kevin Marsh has never been found. His three friends, who watched him walk 50 feet across open terrain and disappear, have never been able to explain what happened. They were interviewed separately, and their accounts matched precisely. He walked toward the rock. He rounded the corner. He never came back. The investigation examined several theories. The first theory was a fall into a concealed crevice. The volcanic rock of the superstitions contains fissures that may not be visible until a person is directly above them. Perhaps Kevin stepped onto unstable ground that gave way, dropping him into a space too narrow to observe from above. This theory prompted detailed examination of the rock formation. Searchers checked every crack and opening large enough to admit a human body. They found nothing. No fissures deep enough to conceal a person were identified. The second theory was that he climbed past the intended ledge and fell from a higher point. Perhaps he decided to go further than planned and lost his footing. Perhaps he fell into a location that could not be seen from the saddle. The terrain above the ledge was searched. Rappelling teams descended the formations on all sides. No body was found. No evidence of a fall was discovered. The third theory was voluntary departure. Perhaps he used the rock formation as cover to leave the group deliberately. Perhaps he climbed down the far side and walked away while his friends waited. But why would he do this? His phone was left behind. His car keys were with his friends. His wallet was in his jacket, which was still on his body when he disappeared. If he planned to leave, he made no practical preparations for departure, and his friends would have seen him. The terrain around Fremont Saddle is exposed. A person in a bright orange jacket walking across the rocky landscape would be visible for considerable distance. Other hikers were on the trail that morning. None reported seeing him after the group reached the saddle. The fourth theory involves the timeline itself. Perhaps more time passed than his friends perceived. Perhaps they became distracted by conversation or their phones, and minutes became longer without their awareness. Perhaps Kevin had time to travel further than they believed possible. His friends rejected this theory. They were specifically watching for him to appear on the ledge. They checked the time when they became concerned. The elapsed period between his disappearance and their alarm was approximately 3 minutes, not long enough for him to cover significant distance. The fifth theory is that his friends were mistaken or deceived. Perhaps something happened within the group that they chose not to report accurately. Perhaps the story of his climbing the formation conceals a different sequence of events. Investigators examined this possibility carefully. The three friends were interviewed multiple times, separately and together. Their accounts remained consistent. Polygraph examinations, while not definitive, showed no indication of deception. Their relationships with Kevin appeared friendly with no evidence of conflict. The case remains open. Kevin Marsh walked away from his friends on a clear November morning, in plain view, on a popular trail with other hikers nearby, and vanished. His phone was found. His body never was. His family has offered rewards for information. His friends have returned to the saddle multiple times, trying to understand what they witnessed. The rock formation where he disappeared continues to attract hikers who photographed the view, unaware that they stand where a man vanished in front of witnesses less than a decade ago. The Superstition Mountains have accumulated cases like these for over a century. Prospectors who walked into canyons and never returned. Hikers who left trails and could not be found. Treasure hunters who followed maps into terrain that kept them permanently. The pattern predates modern record-keeping and continues into the present. Local search and rescue teams have observed that recoveries in the Superstitions follow different patterns than in other Arizona wilderness areas. Bodies are found in unexpected locations, far from logical routes. Equipment is discovered separated from remains by distances that suggest post-mortem movement, though by what agency remains unclear. Some cases are never resolved despite repeated searches of limited areas. These observations are professional assessments, not folklore. The people who conduct rescues in this terrain have noticed anomalies they cannot fully explain. They do not attribute these anomalies to supernatural causes. They simply note that the Superstitions behave differently than other wilderness areas they serve. 5 clusters, 5 geographic zones where disappearances have concentrated over decades. Yosemite and its granite high country, the fog-shrouded hollows of the Great Smoky Mountains, Mount Rainier with its glaciers and sudden weather, the volcanic landscape around Mount Shasta, the desert canyons of the Superstition Mountains. Each cluster has its own characteristics. The terrain differs, the climate differs, the typical victim profile differs, but patterns emerge when the cases are examined together. The first common pattern is the behavior of search dogs. Across all 5 clusters, cases repeatedly feature dogs that track a missing person to a specific point and then lose the trail entirely. The boulder field in Yosemite, where the trail of the photographer ended. The creek crossing in the Smokies, where the scent of the biology teacher disappeared. The game trail junction in the Superstitions, where the track of the retired engineer split and faded. Dogs lose trails for known reasons: water crossings, vehicle entry, contamination by other scents, degradation over time. But the consistency of this pattern across diverse terrain types and conditions suggests something beyond ordinary trail interruption. Handlers in multiple clusters have reported dogs exhibiting confusion rather than simply losing scent, circling areas repeatedly as if the trail ended without the person having walked away in any direction. The second common pattern is the distance between last known location and eventual discovery site. When remains or equipment are found, they are often miles from where the person intended to be, in terrain that does not lie along any logical route from the starting point. The backpack found 3 miles north of the intended canyon. The camera lens cap found 8 miles from the boulder field. The body found in a drainage that required crossing a significant ridge. These distances challenge explanations based on simple disorientation. A confused person typically wanders in expanding circles, remaining relatively close to their starting point. The distances in cluster cases suggest sustained directional travel, covering miles of difficult terrain. Something moved these people far from where they were supposed to be. The third common pattern is the separation of equipment from remains. Packs found without bodies. Bodies found without packs. Water bottles left behind with water still in them. Phones discovered wedged in rocks with no sign of their owners. The normal expectation is that a person who dies in the wilderness will be found with their equipment, or that equipment scattered by animals will show signs of that scattering. Cluster cases repeatedly feature clean separations that do not match either scenario. The fourth common pattern is the failure of extensive searches in contained areas. Kevin Marsh disappeared from a space that could be comprehensively searched in hours. Margaret Chen vanished from a route she had walked a dozen times. Raymond Castellanos wasn't found despite searches covering every canyon within miles of his intended destination. When search areas are limited and terrain is passable, people should be findable. In cluster cases, they often are not. The fifth common pattern is the folklore that accumulates around cluster zones. indigenous oral traditions warning about certain areas, settler stories of spirits and creatures, modern residents speaking of places they avoid, sounds they have heard, experiences they hesitate to describe. This folklore proves nothing about the causes of disappearances, but its consistent presence across clusters spanning thousands of miles and multiple cultural contexts suggests a common human response to landscapes where people disappear at elevated rates. What creates these clusters? Why do certain geographic areas accumulate disappearances while adjacent areas of similar terrain do not? Several conventional explanations have been proposed. The first explanation is terrain complexity. All 5 clusters feature landscapes with features that can disorient travelers, repeating patterns that make landmarks unreliable, canyons that funnel movement in unexpected directions, vegetation that limits visibility, elevation changes that alter perspective. Perhaps clusters simply represent areas where navigation is unusually difficult. This explanation has merit, but does not fully account for the evidence. Many wilderness areas feature complex terrain without accumulating disproportionate disappearances. And cluster cases often involve experienced people familiar with the specific terrain where they vanished. The second explanation is microclimates and localized weather. Several clusters are known for rapid weather changes: fog in the Smokies, storms on Rainier, temperature swings in the Superstitions. Perhaps clusters represent areas where weather creates hazards more frequently than surrounding zones. Weather certainly contributes to wilderness accidents, but weather-related deaths typically produce recoverable bodies. The pattern of cluster cases involves people who vanish completely, not people who die from exposure and are subsequently found. The third explanation is statistical clustering in random distributions. When events are randomly distributed across geography, clusters will appear by chance alone. Perhaps the zones identified as clusters represent nothing more than random variation that human pattern seeking has transformed into apparent significance. This explanation cannot be definitively ruled out. However, researchers who have analyzed disappearance data argue that the concentration in certain zones exceeds what random distribution would predict. The cases do not appear to be randomly distributed. They appear to concentrate. The fourth explanation is reporting bias. Perhaps disappearances in certain areas receive more attention, leading to more complete documentation, creating the appearance of clustering where none exists. Famous areas like Yosemite may simply have better records than obscure wilderness zones. This explanation is difficult to evaluate. Record-keeping varies across jurisdictions and time periods. However, the clusters identified in this investigation span different management agencies, different states, and different eras of documentation. The pattern appears across varied reporting contexts. The fifth explanation is that something about these specific geographic zones creates genuine hazard concentrations, not supernatural phenomena, but natural features or conditions that have not been fully identified or understood. Magnetic anomalies that affect navigation equipment or human orientation, atmospheric conditions that impair judgment, geological features that create hidden hazards, acoustic properties that mask sounds of distress or rescue. This explanation is speculative, but not impossible. The natural world contains phenomena that remain incompletely documented. Certain caves produce infrasound that causes disorientation and panic. Certain rock formations create acoustic shadows where sounds do not propagate normally. Certain magnetic anomalies affect compass function. Perhaps clusters represent zones where such phenomena concentrate in ways that increase human vulnerability. None of these explanations is fully satisfying. None accounts for all the observed patterns. The clusters remain, accumulating new cases, generating new questions, producing no definitive answers. What does this mean for people who venture into these areas? The cases examined in this investigation should not prevent people from enjoying wilderness recreation. Millions of visitors enter cluster zones annually and return safely. The individuals who disappear represent a tiny fraction of total visitation. The absolute risk remains low, even in areas of elevated relative risk. But certain precautions may be particularly important in cluster zones. Communication systems matter more than in other areas. Carrying satellite messengers or personal locator beacons provides a way to signal for help when cellular coverage is absent. Several cluster cases involved people who could not be located, despite being in defined areas. A device that transmits coordinates could mean the difference between recovery and permanent disappearance. Navigation redundancy is essential. Carrying multiple navigation aids reduces vulnerability to equipment failure or disorientation. GPS devices, compasses, paper maps, and the skills to use all of them provide backup when any single method fails. Travel companions provide safety margins. The cases examined here disproportionately involve solo travelers. A companion can summon help, provide assistance with injuries, and serve as a witness to what occurred. The case of Kevin Marsh demonstrates that companions do not guarantee safety, but they improve odds. Trip plans filed with responsible parties enable faster response. Several cluster cases involve delays between disappearance and search initiation because no one knew exactly where the missing person intended to be. Specific itineraries shared with family or friends can focus searches on areas most likely to produce results. Respect for local knowledge may have value. Communities that have lived alongside cluster zones for generations have developed perspectives on these landscapes. While their accounts may contain folklore mixed with genuine observation, their avoidance of certain areas may reflect accumulated experience with hazards that official documentation has not captured. The families of missing persons in cluster zones face particular challenges. The uncertainty can last years or decades. The eventual discoveries, when they occur, often raise as many questions as they answer. The closure that comes from recovering remains is often incomplete closure, accompanied by mysteries about how the person ended up where they were found. These families deserve support that acknowledges the unusual nature of their losses. Standard grief resources may not address the specific trauma of wilderness disappearance, where the missing person occupies a space between life and death for extended periods, where hope and despair alternate with each new search or reported sighting. The clusters will continue to accumulate cases. Tomorrow or next month or next year, someone will enter one of these zones and not return. A search will be conducted. Dogs will lose a trail. Equipment will be found in unexpected locations. Questions will be asked that have no answers. This is not a failure of search and rescue capabilities. The people who conduct wilderness searches are skilled and dedicated professionals. They find most of the people who go missing. But the clusters produce cases that defeat their best efforts, that leave files open for years, that join the accumulating count of the permanently missing. The Superstition Mountains will claim more hikers. The Great Smoky Mountains will add to their list of the vanished. Yosemite's high country will produce new cases that echo the patterns of old ones. Mount Rainier will take climbers who never come down. The forests around Mount Shasta will generate new searches that find nothing. These are not supernatural predictions. They are statistical projections based on documented patterns. The clusters have been claiming people for generations. There is no evidence that they have stopped. Raymond Castellanos, Kevin Marsh, Nathan Howell, Margaret Chen, and all the others whose names appear in files, whose faces appear on missing posters, whose families have walked the trails they walked, hoping to find what the wilderness has hidden. They entered landscapes that draw millions of visitors annually. They prepared appropriately for their skill levels. They told people where they were going. They did what responsible wilderness travelers do, and they vanished. The wilderness offers experiences that cannot be found elsewhere. The beauty is real. The solitude is valuable. The challenge is rewarding. Millions of people find these things in cluster zones every year without incident. But a small number find something else. They find the edge of the map, the boundary beyond which recovery becomes uncertain, the space where people go and do not return. 5 clusters, decades of cases, patterns that challenge explanation, questions that remain unanswered. If you found value in this investigation, consider subscribing to this channel. We examine patterns in wilderness disappearances. We document cases that official reports treat in isolation. We ask questions that deserve to be asked, even when answers are not available. Share this video with people who spend time in wilderness areas. The patterns documented here deserve attention from anyone who ventures into these landscapes. Awareness of cluster zones and their characteristics may contribute to safer decision-making. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Have you hiked in any of these cluster areas? Have you noticed anything unusual? The documentation of these patterns benefits from observations shared by people who know these landscapes. If you have information about any missing person in these or other wilderness areas, please contact the appropriate law enforcement agencies. Cases remain open for decades. Families continue hoping for resolution. A detail observed years ago might provide answers someone has been waiting for. The trails remain. The mountains remain. The forests and deserts and canyons remain. They are beautiful. They are dangerous. They keep secrets that may never be revealed. Be safe in the wild places. Travel with companions when possible. Carry communication devices. File detailed trip plans. Respect the accumulated knowledge of people who live alongside these landscapes. And if you find yourself in a cluster zone, in terrain that has claimed others before you, pay attention. Notice what the landscape is doing. Notice how you feel. Notice if something seems wrong. The clusters do not explain themselves, but they provide evidence. They provide patterns. They provide warnings for those who choose to hear them. The investigation continues. The clusters continue to grow. The wilderness continues to keep its secrets. And somewhere in these 5 zones, in granite and forest and volcanic rock and desert sand, the missing remain, waiting to be found, or waiting to be forgotten, or simply waiting, in whatever state the wilderness has placed them, for something that may never come.